The morning sun painted golden stripes across my 3 acres as I scattered feed for my small flock of 12 chickens. The soft clucking and gentle cooing echoed across the property, a sound that had greeted me every morning for the past 7 years since I had purchased this modest ranch house with my retirement savings. Each chicken had a name and personality. Henrietta, the bossy Rhode Island red who always ate first. Marmalade, the gentle orange buff Orpington who followed me like a puppy, and the others who made up my feathered family. They were more than just egg producers. They were companions who had helped me through the loneliness after my husband passed away. My property sat at the edge of what was once a rural farming community called Willowbrook. The scattered homes were all on 2 to 5 acre lots, with plenty of space between neighbors. Most residents had lived here for decades, raising animals and growing gardens without issue. My own place was modest but precious to me. A single-story ranch house with a wraparound porch, a detached garage I had converted into a workshop, and a well-maintained chicken coop that my late husband had built with his own hands before cancer took him from me. The trouble began 6 months ago when the old Hargrove farm down the road sold to a developer. I remember watching with growing unease as bulldozers cleared the 100-acre property and surveyors placed stakes for what would become Willowbrook Estates, a planned community of 96 homes on quarter-acre lots. The construction noise disrupted our peaceful community for months, but we had no idea how much more would change. The letter arrived on a Tuesday in April. I recognized the official-looking envelope with the embossed logo of Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association and almost threw it away, assuming it was a misdelivery. But curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it while standing at my mailbox. "Dear Willowbrook resident," it began. "Due to recent rezoning and annexation approval by the county commissioners, your property now falls within the jurisdiction of the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association. Enclosed, please find a copy of the community bylaws, architectural standards, and fee schedule. Monthly dues of $125 will commence next month." I laughed out loud and shook my head. This had to be a mistake. My property predated their development by decades. I had never signed any HOA contract. I tossed the letter onto my kitchen counter and forgot about it until the second notice arrived 2 weeks later, more sternly worded than the first. When the third notice included a meeting invitation, I decided to attend simply to clear up the misunderstanding. The meeting was held in the newly constructed Willowbrook Estates Clubhouse, a building with soaring ceilings, marble floors, and chandelier lighting that screamed of excessive HOA fees. I felt immediately out of place in my jeans and flannel shirt amid the sea of pressed khakis and polo shirts. The HOA board sat at a long table at the front of the room, 5 members in total. But one stood out immediately. A woman with immaculately styled blonde hair, designer clothes, and a permanently fixed smile that never quite reached her eyes. She introduced herself as Karen Whitmore, HOA president, before proceeding to run the meeting with the precision of a military officer. "Item 7 on tonight's agenda," Karen announced, her voice carrying across the room. "Property compliance issues." The digital projector clicked, and suddenly my home was displayed on the wall. The image showed my chicken coop, my garden shed, and my workshop, all circled in red. "As you can see," Karen continued, pointing with a laser pointer, "we have several properties that were incorporated into our HOA boundaries that are not in compliance with our community standards. This property at 1635 Old Mill Road currently has livestock, unapproved outbuildings, and non-standard fencing." I felt my face grow hot as all eyes in the room turned toward me. I raised my hand to speak, but Karen continued without acknowledging me. Our architectural committee has prepared notices for all non-compliant properties. The board has unanimously voted to provide a 30-day grace period for correction of these violations before fines begin accruing. When the meeting ended, I approached the front table, my heart pounding. "Excuse me, but there must be some mistake. My property is not part of your HOA. I never signed any agreement." Karen looked up, her smile never wavering. "Oh, you must be Mrs. Johnson from Old Mill Road. I am afraid you are mistaken. The county rezoning made your property part of our subdivision. The paperwork was filed 3 months ago. Perhaps you missed the public notice in the newspaper." Her condescending tone made it clear she knew exactly what had happened. As I drove home that night, the reality of my situation began to sink in. This was not just about rules or aesthetics. This was about control. And from the cold look in Karen Whitmore's eyes when she spoke about my farm animals, I knew this was only the beginning of my problems. The HOA packet sat open on my kitchen table, pages spread out like a battlefield map. I had spent the entire weekend poring over the bylaws, regulations, and architectural standards they had sent. Yellow sticky notes marked pages, while my highlighter tracked contradictions and potential loopholes. The section on animals was particularly restrictive. No livestock, poultry, or farm animals of any kind shall be raised, bred, or kept on any lot. Pets are limited to 2 common household pets per dwelling, not to exceed 25 pounds each at maturity. My 12 beloved chickens were clearly in violation, but something about the whole situation felt wrong. I had owned this property for years before the development existed. How could they retroactively force me into their HOA without my consent? I called the county clerk's office first thing Monday morning and requested copies of all rezoning documents related to Willowbrook Estates. The clerk sounded sympathetic when I explained my situation. "This has been happening more and more lately," she confided. "Developers buy up land, then use their connections with the commissioners to expand their boundaries. The public notices are technically legal but published in such a way that most people miss them. By the time homeowners realize what is happening, it is too late." The documents arrived by email later that afternoon, and I printed them all. The rezoning map clearly showed my property had indeed been incorporated into the Willowbrook Estates development zone. A small asterisk at the bottom noted that all properties within the zone were subject to HOA governance regardless of when they were built. I needed to know more about who I was dealing with. I drove slowly through the new development, noting the cookie-cutter homes with their matching mailboxes and identical landscaping. When I reached the cul-de-sac at the back of the subdivision, I was surprised to discover that Karen Whitmore's large 2-story colonial backed directly onto my property line. From her second-floor windows, she would have a perfect view of my chicken coop and backyard. That evening, I searched online for information about Karen Whitmore. Social media revealed she had moved here from Lakeside Heights, another affluent subdivision about 30 miles away. Digging deeper, I found several newspaper articles about contentious HOA actions in her former neighborhood. One headline particularly caught my eye: "Lakeside Heights residents protest HOA foreclosures." The article detailed how several homeowners had lost their homes due to unpaid HOA fines that had ballooned with late fees and legal costs. In each case, Karen Whitmore, then HOA treasurer, had been quoted defending the actions as necessary to maintain community standards and property values. Another community forum thread from Lakeside Heights contained dozens of comments from former neighbors describing how Karen had systematically targeted certain homes for violations. primarily older residents and families, who did not fit her vision of the right kind of neighbors. My stomach knotted as I realized what I was dealing with. This was not just about chickens or property aesthetics. This was about power and control, wielded by someone with a documented history of forcing out undesirable elements. 2 weeks after the first meeting, I attended another HOA session, this time sitting quietly in the back to observe. The pattern quickly became clear. Karen would single out properties for violations, displaying photos on the projector with a running commentary about maintaining our exclusive community standards. Most homeowners sat silently, eyes down, as their violations were publicly displayed. One elderly man tried to explain that his medical condition had prevented him from repainting his shutters within the required time frame, but Karen cut him off. The architectural committee does not consider personal circumstances when evaluating compliance, she stated flatly. The standards apply equally to everyone. When the meeting ended, I approached the elderly man in the parking lot. That seemed pretty harsh in there, I offered. You must be new, he replied with a sad smile. I have lived here 6 months and already received 7 violation notices. My wife wants to sell, but we would lose money if we moved now. He shook his head. Between us, I think they want the older homes gone so they can build more of those giant monstrosities that sell for twice the price. Over the next few days, I connected with other neighbors who shared similar stories. The pattern was always the same: constant harassment over minor violations, escalating fines, and an appeals process that was designed to fail. 3 families had already sold their homes at a loss just to escape the toxic environment. When my own violation notice arrived a week later, I was not surprised. The official letter cited unauthorized livestock and included a fine of $500 plus $50 per day until the chickens were removed. What was surprising was the additional violations for my unapproved outbuildings and excessive garden area, structures and garden beds that had existed for decades before the development was even conceived. As I stood in my kitchen reading the notice, I glanced out the window to see Karen standing at the edge of her property, camera in hand, photographing my chicken coop. Our eyes met briefly before she turned and walked back toward her house with a satisfied smile. I knew then that this was not going to be resolved with a simple conversation or appeal. This was war, and I needed to understand the battlefield if I was going to win. The coffee shop was nearly empty when I met with Sarah, a former colleague from the law firm where I had worked as a paralegal for 20 years. She had recently made partner, specializing in real estate law, and had agreed to meet me as a favor for old time's sake. I brought my binder of documents, including the HOA communications, rezoning papers, and violation notices. So let me get this straight, Sarah said, pushing her reading glasses up her nose as she examined the papers. They rezoned your property without your knowledge or consent, forcibly incorporated you into their HOA, and are now demanding you get rid of animals you have kept for years. That is exactly what is happening, I confirmed, pointing to the violation notice. And from what I have gathered, this Karen Whitmore has a history of targeting certain homeowners until they are forced to sell. Her house directly overlooks my property, and I think she wants me gone. Sarah leafed through the documents with a practiced eye. The rezoning appears legally executed, though I question the notification process. The HOA incorporation is more problematic. There are precedents where pre-existing properties have been exempted from certain restrictions. She paused, tapping her pen against her coffee cup. But I am not sure that is your strongest angle. Tell me more about these chickens. How long have you had them? What do they mean to you? The question caught me off guard. 7 years now. I got them after my husband died. They give me purpose, routine. Caring for them gets me out of bed in the morning. The eggs are a bonus, but honestly, they are more like pets to me. I know each one by name and personality. Sarah was nodding slowly, a small smile forming. Have you ever heard of the Fair Housing Act and emotional support animals? Vaguely, I admitted. That is for service dogs and such, right? Not just service animals, Sarah explained, leaning forward. Emotional support animals fall under the Fair Housing Act as a reasonable accommodation for people with disabilities, including mental health conditions like depression or anxiety. And here is the crucial part. HOAs cannot prohibit emotional support animals, even if their bylaws ban that type of animal. She pulled out her laptop and typed quickly. The law defines a disability broadly as a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. Depression after losing your spouse would qualify, especially if these chickens provide therapeutic benefit. My mind raced as I considered this new information. So you are saying I could register my chickens as emotional support animals? Is that actually legal? Completely legal, Sarah confirmed. The Fair Housing Act is federal law, which supersedes HOA regulations. You would need documentation from a healthcare provider stating that you have a disability and that the emotional support animals help alleviate symptoms of that disability. The law does not limit the type of animal or the number. That afternoon, I made an appointment with Dr. Matthews, my longtime physician who had helped me through the depression following my husband's death. I explained the situation with the HOA and asked about emotional support animal documentation. To be honest, Martha, Dr. Matthews said after listening to my story, I should have suggested this years ago. You were in a dark place after Tom died, and those chickens gave you purpose when nothing else could. I have watched your mental health improve dramatically since you started caring for them. He typed on his computer. I am going to provide you with formal documentation stating that you have a disability under the Fair Housing Act and that these chickens serve as emotional support animals necessary for your mental health. This is not bending the rules. This is exactly what the law was designed to protect. 3 days later, I received an official letter on Dr. Matthews' letterhead. The document stated that I had been diagnosed with depression and anxiety, conditions that qualified as disabilities under federal law, and that my emotional support animals, specifically my 12 chickens, provided therapeutic benefit essential to my mental health and well-being. Armed with this documentation and a letter Sarah had helped me draft, I prepared my response to the HOA violation notice. The letter was professional but firm, citing specific sections of the Fair Housing Act, relevant case law, and attaching the medical documentation. It concluded with a formal request for reasonable accommodation under federal law and demanded that the violation notice be rescinded immediately. What they are doing is not just unreasonable, it is potentially illegal, Sarah had explained. The Fair Housing Act prohibits discrimination based on disability, and failure to provide reasonable accommodation constitutes discrimination. Make sure you keep copies of everything. I made 3 copies of my response package, one for my records, one to mail to the HOA board care of their management company, and one to hand deliver to Karen Whitmore herself. The letter was professional, but made it clear that I understood my rights under federal law and was prepared to defend them. With trembling hands but resolute determination, I sealed the envelopes and drove to the post office. As I dropped the official copy into the mail slot, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. For the first time since this ordeal began, I had a plan and legal backing. The hand delivery to Karen's house was harder. I rang her doorbell at exactly 6:30 p.m. when I had noticed she was typically home from work. The look of surprise on her face when she opened the door was worth the anxiety of the confrontation. "Martha," she said with that same false smile, "what can I do for you?" "I am just delivering my response to the HOA violation notice," I said calmly, handing her the envelope. "It includes documentation regarding my emotional support animals protected under the Fair Housing Act. I wanted to ensure you received it personally." Her smile faltered for just a moment before she composed herself. "I will make sure the board reviews it, but I should warn you that we have legal counsel who advises us on all matters." "As do I," I replied with my own smile. "Have a good evening, Karen." As I walked away, I heard her already on the phone, her voice urgent and annoyed. I had struck the first blow in what I knew would be a difficult battle, but for the first time, I felt I had a fighting chance. That night, my phone buzzed constantly with text notifications. Through the neighborhood grapevine, I learned that Karen had called an emergency board meeting for the following evening. My simple response had clearly rattled her perfect control, and now I waited to see how she would respond. 1 week after submitting my Fair Housing Act documentation, a thick envelope arrived from the HOA's legal counsel. I opened it at my kitchen table, my hands slightly trembling despite my attempts to remain calm. The letter was written in dense legal language, but its message was clear. My request for accommodation had been denied. "After careful review of your submission," the letter stated, "the board has determined that your documentation is insufficient to establish the presence of a qualifying disability as defined under the Fair Housing Act. Furthermore, the board questions whether 12 chickens constitute a reasonable accommodation even if such a disability were present. The board maintains that poultry are livestock, not emotional support animals, and thus remain in violation of community standards." The letter went on to inform me that the original violation notice remained in effect, and that fines would begin accruing immediately. A new compliance deadline was set for 2 weeks from the date of the letter. I placed the letter down and took a deep breath. Though I had anticipated resistance, the outright denial still felt like a punch to the stomach. I was about to call Sarah when movement outside my window caught my eye. Karen Whitmore stood at the edge of her property, not even attempting to hide her surveillance of my backyard. She held a clipboard and was photographing my chicken coop with a professional-looking camera equipped with a telephoto lens. When she noticed me watching, she merely waved with mock friendliness before continuing her documentation. This became a daily occurrence. Every morning at approximately 8:30 a.m., Karen would appear at the property line to conduct her inspection. Sometimes she brought other board members, pointing out perceived violations with dramatic gestures. My chickens, my garden shed, even my flower beds all became subjects of her scrutiny. I responded by becoming meticulous about property maintenance. I painted my shed, trimmed my hedges, and made sure not a single weed dared show itself in my garden beds. I kept detailed records of Karen's visits, noting dates, times, and any interactions. I also took my own photographs documenting the excellent condition of my property, building a visual case against her harassment. Despite my efforts, the violation notices continued to arrive. Each week brought new complaints, increasingly trivial and absurd. My mailbox was 2 inches too low according to HOA standards. The color of my garden hose was not in keeping with the community aesthetic. My bird feeder was an unapproved outdoor fixture. Each violation carried its own fine, and they were beginning to add up to substantial amounts. One afternoon, I returned from grocery shopping to find a new violation notice taped to my front door. This one cited excessive noise from livestock and included time-stamped photographs of my chicken coop taken from angles that could only have been captured from inside my property line. "This is impossible," I muttered to myself as I examined the photographs. My chickens were notably quiet. I had specifically chosen breeds known for their gentle temperaments and minimal noise. The only time they made significant noise was when they were disturbed or frightened. A disturbing thought occurred to me. I walked to the chicken coop and carefully examined the area around it. There, in the soft dirt, were footprints that did not match my garden shoes. Someone had been in my backyard, approaching the coop from the side facing Karen's property. That evening, I called a security company and scheduled an installation for the following day. By sunset the next day, 6 high-definition cameras with motion detection had been installed around my property, with particular coverage of the chicken coop and the property line adjacent to Karen's house. The system included cloud storage of footage and alerts sent directly to my phone when motion was detected in key areas. "This is quite a comprehensive system for a residential property," the technician commented as he finished the installation. "Having trouble with trespassers?" "You could say that," I replied. "Let us just say I have a neighbor who does not respect boundaries." I did not have to wait long for results. 2 days after installing the cameras, my phone buzzed with an alert while I was at the grocery store. The notification showed a still image from my backyard camera. Karen Whitmore standing next to my chicken coop, holding what appeared to be small pebbles in her hand. I immediately left my shopping cart and raced home. By the time I arrived, Karen was gone, but my security system had captured everything. The footage clearly showed her entering my property from the side gate, approaching the chicken coop, and throwing small stones at the enclosure to startle the chickens. She then stood with her phone, apparently recording the ensuing noise and commotion she had deliberately caused. I was furious but forced myself to remain calm. This was exactly the kind of evidence I needed to demonstrate harassment. I downloaded the footage and stored it in multiple locations for safekeeping. The next day, I received another noise violation notice. This one included a sound recording of agitated chickens, the very disturbance Karen had manufactured. The fine had been increased to $250, with the notation that repeated violations demonstrate willful noncompliance. That evening, I captured additional footage of Karen attempting the same tactic, this time throwing what looked like bird seed close to the property line, clearly trying to lure my chickens into making noise. When this failed to produce the desired effect, her frustration was visible as she stomped back to her house. Over the next 2 weeks, the cameras documented 5 separate incidents of Karen trespassing on my property to antagonize my chickens or document alleged violations. In one particularly brazen episode, she was accompanied by another board member who looked distinctly uncomfortable as Karen pushed open my gate and led them onto my property. "This is technically trespassing," the other board member could be heard saying on the footage. "Should we not be doing this through official channels?" "We are the official channel," Karen responded dismissively. "How else are we supposed to document violations if homeowners hide them?" The violation notices continued to accumulate, along with the fines. By the end of the month, I had received notices totaling over $2,000 in fines, and a letter from the HOA attorney warning that a lien would be placed on my property if payment was not received within 30 days. I gathered all the security footage, violation notices, and my communication records into a comprehensive file. The harassment had gone far beyond the initial chicken dispute. This had become a systematic campaign to either force me into compliance or drive me out of my home entirely. I needed serious legal help. "Sarah," I said when I called my attorney friend, "I think I am going to need more than just advice. I need representation. Things have escalated, and I have evidence of harassment and trespassing." "Send me everything you have," Sarah replied, her voice serious. "From what you are describing, we may have grounds for a harassment claim in addition to the Fair Housing Act violations. This has gone beyond an HOA dispute, Martha. This is now about your basic rights as a property owner." As I hung up the phone, I noticed Karen standing at her back window, watching my house. For a moment, our eyes met across the distance, and I held her gaze steadily until she turned away. This was no longer just about my chickens. It was about standing up to a bully who had pushed too far. The law office of Townsend and Associates occupied the entire 5th floor of a glass and steel building downtown. Sarah had arranged for me to meet with Robert Townsend himself, a senior partner who specialized in housing discrimination cases. His office was intimidating: wall-to-wall law books, framed legal degrees, and photographs of him shaking hands with various politicians and judges. "Mrs. Johnson," he greeted me, rising from behind an imposing mahogany desk. "Sarah has briefed me on your situation. I understand you are having issues with an overzealous HOA." "That would be putting it mildly," I replied, placing my 3-ring binder on his desk. "This contains everything: the original HOA notifications, my emotional support animal documentation, all violation notices, and evidence of harassment, including security camera footage of the HOA president trespassing on my property." Robert spent the next hour methodically reviewing my documentation, occasionally asking clarifying questions or making notes. His expression remained neutral, but I noticed his eyebrows raise several times while reviewing the security footage. "Mrs. Johnson, what we have here is significantly more than a dispute over chickens," he finally said, closing my binder. "Based on my initial review, I see potential violations of the Fair Housing Act, harassment, possible defamation, trespassing, and abuse of HOA authority. The fact that they continued enforcement actions after you properly submitted accommodation documentation is particularly troubling." He leaned forward, his tone becoming more serious. "I believe we have grounds for a strong case, but I want to be clear. These battles can be lengthy and stressful. Are you prepared for that?" "I have lived on that property for 7 years," I replied firmly. "My husband and I chose it specifically for the rural setting and the ability to keep chickens. These animals are not just pets. They helped me survive after he died. I am not giving them up, and I am not being bullied out of my home." Robert nodded approvingly. "Then let us begin building your case properly. First, I would like you to see a specialist who can provide more detailed documentation regarding your mental health condition and the therapeutic benefit of your emotional support animals." The following week, I met with Dr. Alina Chen, a psychiatrist who specialized in emotional support animal certification. She conducted a thorough evaluation, reviewing my medical history and asking detailed questions about my relationship with my chickens. "The connection you have with these animals is genuinely therapeutic," Dr. Chen concluded. "Your daily care routine provides structure, your attachment to them gives emotional support, and the responsibility helps combat depression symptoms. From a clinical perspective, these chickens absolutely qualify as emotional support animals under the Fair Housing Act." Her official documentation was much more detailed than my regular doctor's letter, citing specific provisions of the Fair Housing Act and explaining how my mental health condition met the legal definition of disability. She also included research citations on the mental health benefits of animal care for individuals with depression and anxiety. With this stronger documentation in hand, Robert helped me prepare a comprehensive legal strategy. We compiled a timeline of events, cross-referenced with evidence from security cameras, emails, and official HOA communications. We organized statements from neighbors who had witnessed Karen's harassment or experienced similar treatment themselves. Getting witness statements is crucial, Robert explained. It establishes a pattern of behavior rather than an isolated incident. I spent several evenings visiting neighbors, particularly those who had mentioned problems with the HOA. Some were initially reluctant to get involved, fearing retaliation, but the security footage of Karen trespassing convinced many to speak up. By the end of the week, I had collected 7 signed statements describing similar harassment tactics used against other homeowners. Robert also had me keep a detailed journal documenting the positive impact my chickens had on my daily mental health. Each morning, I wrote about my routine with the flock, noting how caring for them motivated me to get out of bed, provided structure to my day, and gave me a sense of purpose and connection. These personal accounts are powerful, Robert assured me. They humanize the case and demonstrate the genuine therapeutic relationship with your emotional support animals. While we were preparing our case, the HOA escalated their actions. A certified letter arrived notifying me that due to unpaid fines now totaling $3,750, they had placed a lien on my property. The letter also stated that if the violations were not corrected and fines paid within 60 days, the HOA would begin foreclosure proceedings as permitted by their bylaws. My hands trembled as I showed the letter to Robert during our next meeting. "Can they actually take my home over this?" I asked, my voice barely steady. "They can try," Robert replied grimly, "but we are not going to let that happen. This letter actually strengthens our case by demonstrating the disproportionate enforcement actions they are taking. It is time to go on the offensive." He outlined our next steps: filing a formal Fair Housing Act complaint with the Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, sending a cease and desist letter to the HOA board regarding the harassment, and preparing for potential litigation if necessary. "Your case is unusually strong," Robert said. "Most HOAs back down when confronted with proper documentation and legal representation. The fact that they have escalated to placing a lien after you provided proper emotional support animal documentation is exceptionally aggressive and likely illegal." I left his office that day with a mixture of fear and determination. The stakes had risen dramatically. Now my home itself was at risk. But the evidence we had gathered and the legal foundation we were building gave me confidence that we could fight back effectively. That evening, I sat on my back porch watching my chickens peck contentedly around their enclosure. Henrietta, the oldest of my flock, wandered over and settled next to my feet with a soft cluck. As I gently stroked her feathers, I renewed my determination to protect them and my home, no matter what it took. The formal complaint to the Department of Housing and Urban Development filled 27 pages, including exhibits and evidence. Robert had carefully documented every interaction with the HOA, every violation notice, and every instance of harassment. The complaint specifically cited violations of the Fair Housing Act's provisions regarding reasonable accommodations for disabilities. We included the emotional support animal documentation from both Dr. Matthews and Dr. Chen, along with my personal journal entries documenting the therapeutic benefit of my chickens. Filing with HUD puts the matter under federal jurisdiction, Robert explained as we reviewed the final document. It also creates an official record of the complaint, which can be valuable if we need to pursue additional legal action. Simultaneously, we prepared cease and desist letters for each HOA board member. These letters outline the documented instances of harassment, trespassing, and discrimination, along with the potential legal consequences of continuing such behavior. The letters specifically demanded that the HOA rescind all violation notices related to my chickens, remove the property lien, and cease all harassment immediately. Each letter will be delivered by certified mail with signature confirmation, Robert said. We want documentation that they received our communication. We are also including a USB drive with selected security camera footage for each board member to view. Sometimes seeing evidence of misconduct with their own eyes is more effective than reading about it. The HUD complaint was filed on a Monday. The cease and desist letters were delivered on Tuesday. By Wednesday afternoon, the HOA's attorney had contacted Robert requesting a meeting. We declined the private meeting, instead insisting that any discussions take place at the upcoming HOA meeting scheduled for the following week. We want this addressed publicly, Robert advised. Private negotiations might resolve your individual case, but it would not address the systemic issues in how this HOA operates. The evening of the HOA meeting arrived. I dressed carefully in conservative business attire, a navy suit I had not worn since my paralegal days. Robert met me at my home, and we reviewed our strategy one final time before driving to the community center together. The meeting room was more crowded than usual. Word had spread about the federal complaint, and many homeowners were curious about the outcome. Karen sat at the center of the board table, her expression carefully neutral as we entered. I noticed she had arranged the agenda so that open floor comments were relegated to the end of the meeting, after most people would have left. Robert anticipated this tactic. When Karen called the meeting to order and asked for approval of the agenda, he immediately stood up. "Point of order," he announced in a clear, authoritative voice. "I am Robert Townsend, legal counsel for Martha Johnson. Given the urgency of the federal complaint filed with HUD and the cease and desist notices served to this board, I request the agenda be modified to address these matters first." Karen's composed facade cracked slightly. "This meeting follows a standard agenda that has been approved by the board. We will address other matters during the appropriate time. Then, I must inform everyone present that we have also invited a representative from the Department of Housing and Urban Development to join us tonight, as this case involves potential federal violations," Robert responded. "They are particularly interested in how this board responds to Fair Housing Act compliance issues." This was a strategic exaggeration. We had notified HUD of the meeting, but had not received confirmation they would send a representative. The tactic worked, however. After a hurried, whispered conference with the HOA attorney, Karen reluctantly agreed to modify the agenda. "The board recognizes Mr. Townsend and Mrs. Johnson for 10 minutes regarding their complaint," she announced stiffly. Robert connected his laptop to the projector and began a methodical presentation. He explained the Fair Housing Act provisions regarding emotional support animals, displayed the medical documentation, and showed selected surveillance footage of Karen trespassing on my property. The room grew tense as neighbors watched footage of their HOA president throwing pebbles at my chicken coop to deliberately agitate the birds.